and he has followed every space mission since then. Over the years, he met lots of astronauts and cosmonauts and regularly attends astronaut events. Robert joined the Paisley Astronomical Society in 1971 and attended his first ASG meeting in 1973, joining the Society in 1976. He served on council for many years and was the observing section and Acre Road Observatory liaison. He was at one point a vice president. Me too, Robert. His work commitments, however, at Coates Observatory limited his attendance at meetings. He was the honorary curator of Airdrie Observatory from 1982 to 1987 and from 1999 to 2002. In 1989, he was offered a position at Coates Observatory, Paisley, becoming responsible for public viewing sessions with the 8-inch telescope, showing groups around the observatory and giving planetarium talks. In 2002, he became a visitor assistant at the Mills Observatory in Dundee, and since 2005 has been delivering public observing sessions with the 16-inch reflector, giving planetarium talks and showing visitors around. He is an honorary member of the Ayrshire Astronomical Society and the Airdrie Astronomical Society, where he is an observatory consultant. He has attended the shuttle launches STS-59 and STS-89 and regularly visits Kennedy Space Centre, the last time in January last year, and is planning his next trip in November for the SLS launch, COVID-19 permitting. I'm first to volunteer to carry your bags, Robert, by the way. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and allow Robert to do his stuff. Robert, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Right. Tonight I'm going to look back 50 years ago to Apollo 14, and then I'm going to talk about Apollo 15. And these were the two flights to the moon that we had 50 years ago. And I was only 11 years old at the time. I've been very honoured that, in fact, I've met most of the astronauts that I'm going to be talking about here tonight. I did get to meet Edgar Mitchell and Alan Shepard. And I've actually met all three members of the Apollo 15 crew, and I actually got to know Colonel Worden quite well. So what I'm going to do is I'll look at my ugly face. I'm going to get it to work to share the screen so we can go on and can look at the pictures to get this to work. So, and it's what's happened, it's going haywire. I'm trying to, if you just bear with me, I've lost the, why is it not a, right, I'm just going to,
Or are you having trouble sharing?
yeah, I'm trying to get my, can you see the picture right? Or, right, so I've got the first picture on, what's happened to,
I think the sharing has stopped when you close the program again, so you need to reshare.
Right, right. Right, am I sharing now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Looks good.
Yes.
Can you see can you see it now? It should
yes,
be
well done.
Right,
Yes.
Apollo 14 badge. Sorry, I've never done this before, so you just have to bear with me, right? So this is the every flight that went to the moon, the astronauts designed their mission badge. And so this is the one for Apollo 14. And it's all symbolism, and it shows the Earth and the moon, and it shows the astronaut symbol. this thing that looks like a comet going to the moon. And can get it to. Right, so now this is the crew now. The commander of Apollo 14 was Alan Shepard. And Alan Shepard was America's first astronaut. He first flew in space in 1961, I think it was. So he was supposed to fly on the first Gemini mission, but he got an ear problem. He became quite ill, and he had an ear complaint, a disease in his ear. It affected his balance, among other things. So effectively, he was grounded. And Alan Shepard he took over the running of the astronaut office. And he also did that with Dick Slayton, a fellow a Mercury astronaut who was also grounded for medical reasons. But in the end, both these guys did get to go to space, and Shepard did go to the moon. Now, General Stafford, Tom Stafford, who was the commander on Apollo 10, had got Shepard an appointment with a doctor that reckoned that he could do an operation. It would be a bit hit and miss, it would work, but he had to take the chance it would work. If it didn't work, he would go deaf, basically. And so Shepard took that risk, and the operation was successful. And in 1969, he returned to flight status, basically. And so he was then, basically that meant that he could get the next upcoming mission, Apollo 13. But the problem was that there were a lot of complaints about the amount of training that they would have to do on this, because of his lack of it, basically, So what they did was that they they changed places with the Apollo 14 crew. So Jim Lovell was basically bumped off 14 into 13, if I've got this right. And they spent 18 months training, which was the longest training of any Apollo mission. The other two astronauts, Edgar Mitchell and Stu Roosa. Stu Roosa was the command module pilot, and Edgar was the lunar module pilot. And both these guys hadn't flown in space before, so they were a complete rookie crew. There was a lot hanging on this flight, because after Apollo, the failure of Apollo 13 to get to the moon, there was a lot of worry if this one failed, maybe that would have ended the Apollo program, So there was a lot of concern about this. And I remember that in 1969, we got seeing Neil and Buzz on the moon, and it was just absolutely amazing seeing these pictures. And then, of course, Apollo 12, we watched it at school. Our headmaster, Mr. Bruce, he was a Dundonian and living in Paisley, but he was he let us watch the moonwalk, which lasted all about three minutes, and Alan Bean accidentally turned the TV camera at the sun, and it burnt out the tube, basically. And so it was basically, when we get to Apollo 14, it was a long time to wait, to see the moon again. Apollo 14 was the most expensive of all the moon flights, because basically to go to Far Morrow, which was originally intended for Apollo 13, they had to pay for 2 flights basically to get there. This was the last of what we call the H series of missions. It had a new gadget, and you can see it if you go to the Kennedy Space Center visitor complex. They had a trolley you can see in the artist's conception, which they could put their tools on, and they could maneuver, when it was called the modular equipment transporter. So that this is this gadget here. You put all your tools on it, and then you haul it on your way. So Shepard, this is Alan Shepard with the lunar module trainer. This is the thing you probably saw the film with Neil Armstrong nearly get killed. He had to bail out. So Shepard managed to do all that training, and so they got up to speed in the training, and they And so this is, we're looking here at a map of the moon, and the Apollo 14 landing site is the most southerly of all the Apollo missions, as is Apollo 15, I'll talk about shortly, was the most northerly, and so this is the area that they intended to go to. And this is a lunar orbiter reconnaissance LRO, it's called, photograph of the actual landing site as, and if you look at this, you can see there's the lunar module there, and you can see these trails. That's actually the astronauts' footprints and pulling the cart, behind them. On Apollo 14, they would do 2 spacewalks, what we call extra vehicle EVAs, extra vehicle activities, and they wanted to go to visit Cone Crater. So this is, I used to love, seeing these maps before they went, and back in the day, some of the older members might remember the comic Countdown, and it was like, it had all the Jerry Anderson sci-fi stuff in it, but they ran factual articles in Apollo and what was happening and what would be happening. So I used to love seeing these maps, So the astronauts in this flight would spend 9 days, 1 minute and 58 seconds in space. They'd be launched on the 31st of January 1971, and they would return to Earth on February the 9th. They would do 2 EVAs. The first EVA would last for 4 hours and 47 minutes, which Shepard and Mitchell would set up the Apollo scientific package and all their bits and pieces and equipment. And then they would do a second EVA, which would last for 2 hours and 34 minutes, I've got that right. So moving on, so this is the inside the vehicle assembly building, and this is building up the Apollo 14 Saturn V rocket. And this is rolling out of the vehicle assembly. And I'm getting quite excited to see this again, hopefully later on in the summer. But as you can see, the size of the rocket was 363 feet tall, and it had 3 stages, a first, second, and a third stage. And a wee bit of information that if Margaret Morris was here, she would appreciate this, that it was a Scotsman, John Stewart of the Paisley Rocketeer Society. He was the first guy in the world in 1937 to launch a 3-stage rocket, which is the basis of how the Americans would get to the moon, except that their rocket was a lot bigger. So this is the liftoff, and we had a liftoff that it went okay, but on this flight, it was not going to be smooth running, and we would run into a lot of problems. You could watch live coverage on the TV. Both the BBC and ITN provided coverage. You can see the cover of the Radio Times. And this is a picture. You can see the different things on this day. That on the 2nd of February, you're on the transit to the moon, and the only thing that was really going to happen was at 3:59 a.m. in the morning we had the mid-course correction to this is what the TV Times would look like. Unfortunately, my parents never got these magazines, but my granny got the TV Times because she liked to watch wrestling on STV. That was her thing, It's quite interesting this. You can see a telephone there because ITN had a phone in. So you could phone in the space correspondent Peter Fairley, and you could ask questions. And using the phone would be something that I would do in this flight, because in 1971 I was in the Paisley Museum Art Club, and I met this guy called Stuart McMillan. And Stuart was the first person that I ever met that had the same interest in space as what I had. All the other boys at my school were all Rangers supporters, and were all into football, and I was the only one that was into space, And I remember phoning Stuart to find out what did the moon look like in colour, because we only had a black and white TV. And talking about television, the Apollo 14 used the Westinghouse TV camera which was similar to, it's a color camera. It uses the Baird process of television, the sequential system with a rotating color filter, which Scotland's contribution to Apollo was not only could you see it on the TV, you could see it in color. And this is a system developed by John Logie Baird. And if you go to the Royal Scottish Museum in Chambers Street, they've got the prototype of this system on display. After Apollo 12, the Westinghouse made some improvements to the cathode ray tube and things in the camera in the hope that it wouldn't burn out. Now, the first issue that we get into, that when we go to the moon, we lift off, and you have a first stage separates after about, I think, something like 2 minutes. The second stage takes you in towards orbit, and then you've got the third stage, and you fire the G2 engine for so many minutes, and that gets you into circularizing the orbit. And we go into an orbit, they check a parking orbit, and the astronauts checked all the systems. And they have to make sure that everything's okay before they commit to the translunar injection burn, because once you fire that engine, as we saw in Apollo 13, you just simply can't turn around and come back home. And so we did that, and then what then happens is that the command service module separates, and then they rotate it back, and they fly in, and they dock with the lunar module, and then they extract the lunar module from the kind of garage at the top of the rocket. And what actually happened was that it didn't work, and it took Stu Roosa 6 attempts, I think it was. And if they couldn't link up the lunar module, this flight was going to have to be abandoned. And among the lots of meetings on the ground and all the rest of it, you know, the people were getting, on the last attempt, he rammed in and the latches held, and we got the lunar module out. And what we think the problem was, there was ice in this inside the mechanism. And incidentally, the docking probe was reused on the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975. And the astronauts had serious problems trying to dock with the docking adapter module, which was a special module that the Soyuz spaceship could dock to, you know, because they had used the same problematic one from Apollo 14. But they did manage finally to get that to work. And then, so we have a very uneventful flight to the moon, not a lot happening, so everything's going okay, till we decide that it's time for Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell to land on the moon. And the first thing that happens is, a bit like Apollo 11, the computer fails again, you know, and the computer is trying to abort the mission, you know. But Shepard can see that there isn't actually a problem, you know. So they had to hurriedly, on the ground at Houston, write a computer program, and then they would have to radio it up, because it was all a hexadecimal language. And Mitchell had to type in this program, and what the program was basically saying to the computer was that the abort had actually already happened. And that was a bit risky, because if there was an actual abort situation, that would have been very difficult. But we managed to survive that, you know. And then the next problem that goes, and here we can see the lunar module Antares. So this was taken from Kitty Hawk, the command module, just after it had separated. The next problem was, as we are nearing the ground, the radar fails. And they had this radar device right down here, and that failed, you know, so that's giving them information and the speed and all the rest. That was very scary. But what then happened was that the radar sorted itself at the last minute, and we got a landing, you know. And so this is a very, again, Farnboro's a very smooth area, you know. It was still pretty early on in the Apollo program. They weren't risking going to very rocky sites, etc. I'm just going to go through these pictures. The astronauts used Hasselblad cameras, and they used Ektachrome film, you know. And I remember my dad commenting in 1971 when the Apollo 10 command module was in the old Transport Museum in Albert Drive in Glasgow, that he couldn't believe how good the pictures were. And that's because we using, they used medium format, old school film. Because in 1971 there was no such a thing as digital photography that we have today. The main difference you'll notice is that the spacesuit is different from earlier flights. So this is the Apollo 13 improvements. It looks quite different. They've got this face visor that Armstrong and Aldrin didn't have, for example. And you notice that Shepard's got these red bands on. And that was how they could, because the difficulty in Apollo 11 was that we couldn't see who was that Neil, that buzz we were seeing. So this is the Apollo Lunar Scientific Experiment package, which the astronauts set up. And this is a picture that shows you the trolley that they used on the two spacewalks. Most of the pictures that we see here are black and white, and there's a really good reason for that, is because the monochrome pictures give a far sharper resolution than what colour did. And this is quite an interesting picture which sums up Apollo 14 to me pretty well. This is Edgar looking at his map. Why is he looking at his map? Because he's lost. Because they were supposed to go to Cone Crater. And the problem is, you could see that in all the maps and all the rest, but when they were down on the ground at the landing site, it looked completely different. And Shepard and Mitchell got lost, basically. I think they did get to the edge of that crater, but they had to turn back. The other thing that Apollo 14 is famous for, you can blame Bob Hope, for us older people remember Bob, the comedian, and the film star. Bob Hope is a great golfer like Al Shepard, and he suggested, why don't you play some golf on the moon? So they had a tool and they got a golf club and they patched out a golf club together so that he could fly, he could hit the ball when the ball went quite far, and they lost the ball. And about a month ago, we found the ball using the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. We've actually got a picture of where it ended up. And Edgar, not to be outdone on this flight, he had a javelin and he threw a javelin thing, and they called that the Lunar Olympics. So hopefully we'll have the Olympics in Tokyo, I think, later on in the summer. Coming back now, the picture of the command service module, we came back, and then the big worry on this flight was, would these docking issues happen again? Would they be able to dock? But fortunately, that went okay, and the astronauts returned to Earth separately. Now, on this flight, they brought back 94 pounds of moon rocks. And the most interesting moon rock, I'll just talk about one, is we call Big Bertha. And Big Bertha was the third largest moon rock brought back of all the Apollo missions. What's interesting about this rock, it's not really a moon rock at all. It's an Earth rock. This is an Earth meteorite. I have got a lunar meteorite, a piece of the moon, but this is an Earth meteorite. This is we call this a Robbins medallion. If there's any coin collectors, if you want one of these, you need to be rich. They cost a fortune. I collect space coins, but unfortunately I don't have one of these. On every Apollo flight, they took special minted coins to the moon. So moving on now, watching time, moving on to the second flight we had in 1971. Apollo 15 now. In space, things looked like they were going okay in 71, but in reality, they weren't, because behind the scenes, the NASA's budget was basically being gutted. Richard Nixon was not really interested in space flight. He was petrified after Apollo 13 that they would lose astronauts on his watch, and President Nixon really worried about that. NASA really wanted a space station, and that's what they were aiming for. But John F. Kennedy interrupted by telling them to go to the moon. And they only had so many Saturn V vehicles left. There was a chance that if they cut back on the moon missions, they could have a space station, and that's what we did. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union, their moon rocket was a failure. It just simply didn't work. They tried 3 times and it kept blowing up. So the Russians decided to abandon going to the moon and decided to go down the route of space stations. And in 1971, we had 3 cosmonauts on Salyut 1, which was the first space station. Tragically, when these guys came home, the Russians had made the mistake that they thought, well, we don't really need spacesuits inside the capsule if you're not going out. Spaceflight in 1971 was getting extremely routine for most people. And sadly, there was a valve leak and these guys died. And there was a lot of concern, like some rumors going around was that you couldn't, they'd been in space for 14 days, maybe the human body couldn't survive in weightless conditions and the heart failed, but in the end that was it was a leak basically. And that was a sad thing that we had in 1971. But then in July of 1971, we had Apollo 15. And I'll just go to, this is the crew. So you had Dave Scott, who was the commander. I've actually had Dave at the Mills Observatory visit us. Colonel Warden, Al Warden, who sadly passed away. But all 3 of all these astronauts I'm talking about are sadly no longer with us. And Colonel Irwin, who I met also, he was the lunar module pilot. Now, one of the snazzy things about Apollo 15 was of all the Apollo flights, I think they had a really cool badge, and it shows these kind of wing shapes of the 3 astronauts flying above the moon. Dave Scott wanted to have the 15 in Roman numerals, but NASA refused. They didn't want Roman numerals on mission badges, basically. So Dave Scott got round this. They employed an Italian artist to design the badge. And if you look closely at the craters on the moon, you can see the Roman numerals that make up 15. And NASA didn't even notice this was past, This wasn't the only dodgy thing about Apollo 15. I'll come to that in a minute or two. So of all the Apollo flights, Apollo 15 was probably, it was the zenith of Apollo, basically. It was the most spectacular landing site of all the Apollo missions. They really impressive, They launched on the 26th of July, and they returned to the Earth on the 7th of August. And on this flight, they did 4 extravehicular activities, 4 moonwalks. And this is an easy one to find with your telescope, the Apennine Mountains, and they landed at a place called Hadley Rill. And here's a close-up. And I like to show, this is quite an easy one to find. I like to show people this when they come to the observatory. This is a more detailed chart of what we're going to do. Because Apollo 15 was the first of the J missions, which were kind of really scientific missions in Apollo, And of course, as we all know, the big thing about Apollo 15 was that they had a motor car. So and the idea of the car was that they could get round more sites to look at. They had to stay very close to the lunar module. I think you could get about 50 miles from the lunar rover. But the concern was that if the car broke down, you'd be dead by the time you walked back. You'd run out of oxygen, So they had to keep the routes that they went on if the car did break down, that it would be the astronauts would still be able to walk back to the lunar module. And this is an all Air Force crew on this flight, you know, and this is the astronauts, and you can see that the rollout of the Saturn V is on the mobile platform. And sadly, this platform is currently been scrapped at the Kennedy Space Center because of it. It's just a big box taking up too much room in the car park, basically. And so it's obsolete now. So sadly, this is getting chopped up as I'm speaking to you. After Apollo 13, when half the spaceship got blown to pieces, they realized that, wait a minute, there's a lot of kind of empty space in this service module. Why don't we put some scientific instruments? And there was an Apollo applications program that they looked into of different types of missions to the moon after the initial Apollo project ended. And so they came up with the idea of put lots of film cameras inside the service module, so that while the two astronauts, for instance, so while Jim Irwin and Dave Scott were on the moon, Al Worden could take photographs of different. They could look at different landing sites and do other science experiments. So that this is a big difference with Apollo 15. Another thing about Apollo 15 was that the astronauts launched a small satellite into orbit around the moon. And of course, 50 years later, China has got a big TV satellite at the Lagrange point, you know, which means that the Chinese astronauts will be able to do operations on the far side of the moon, and that they can get direct television back to the Earth. But Apollo 15 was the first human space flight to deploy a satellite. So this is an artist's concept of the deployment of the rover. And a lot of people say, well, these things were all faked. It was done by Stanley Kubrick, filmed it in a film studio. And how could you possibly take the car to the moon? And the answer is that the car was flat packed. It was flat packed inside the base of the lunar module. And what Dave Scott did was he pulled a piece of string, and the thing all opens out, you know, like it's like one of these books you get when you open up, the picture pops out, and then you plug the seats and all the bits into it, as you can see in that picture there. Now, I have vivid memories of watching the launch of Apollo 15 on the TV. And then I was horrified that my dad announced that we were going on a holiday to St Andrews. I have this story I'm going to tell you now. I told this story to Dave Scott and Al Worden, that my dad insisted that we were going to St Andrews. You see, my dad liked golf, and my dad couldn't really go to a better place in the whole world for his holidays than St Andrews. And so that blooming meant that I was going to miss all this. And I remember on the old course at St Andrews, there's any golfers here tonight, haranguing my dad and my Uncle Ben, you know, look, we're going to miss this car on the moon, you know, I want to see this. And we went home to his house, and we got watching. I remember watching James Burke and Patrick Moore, and we seen the car being, you know, being deployed on the moon. So this was a big flight for TV coverage, both independent television news and the BBC. The BBC had a lot more airtime than what ITN had because of the way that the ITV system works. ITV was, you know, basically limited to the news programs, basically, where the BBC could put on extra. It's 1971 now, so we're now talking about colour television, you know. Though in our case, in 1970, my dad didn't listen to me, and he got a new black and white TV. It was a 625 line, and the reason for that was that the colour TV in the early 70s was very expensive. The 625 line was in 1970 was the equivalent of the 4K that I use today, you know, to watch space events. So there is the BBC got a mock-up of the lunar roving vehicle. You can see Patrick and James Buck, and I got to know Patrick quite well over the years. And I did in 1985. James Buck was in Glasgow, so I did manage to meet him. Sadly, I never got a chance to meet Peter Fairley. And as Patrick says, the only limitation to lunar exploration now is that the astronauts daren't go so far that they couldn't get back home again if it broke down. And as James Buck says, it doubles the time that the astronauts can stay out on the moon, and it means that they could look at more places. So this is a publicity image for the BBC TV, and you can see James Buck and Patrick Moore. And that lady there must have a hell of a lot of strength to pull these two out. I've actually sat on a lunar roving vehicle. I've actually seen one. So it's quite. In 1985, they actually had one on display in Edinburgh. Yeah. So this is the TV times for the July the 24th to the 30th, and you can see Apollo 15 another chance to use the hotline to ITN's moon base. So there's a big article in here about all what they were doing. And you can see on the Thursday the 5th, you've got there's a program here, so so it did get a lot of TV coverage. And this is the launch of Apollo 15. It went very well. Apollo 15, I think, was really flawless among most of the Apollo flights. There was something like 300 or 400 things that had to work in sequence, And I think Apollo 15, the most things worked, this was the heaviest Saturn V because of the amount of equipment they were taking, G-forces, etc. And that caused problems to the astronauts that I'll talk about in a minute or two. So here we can see the Earth there, we can see Florida, we can see Titusville and Cape Canaveral. Here we can see South America, there you can see Africa, and there we can see the United Kingdom, and we can see Scotland right up here. It's probably cloudy as usual. And there's it's an image of the moon from Apollo 15. This is a close-up picture that Al Worden took of the landing site. And this landing was really spectacular because when Scott and Irwin came in, they flew in down this valley here in front of all the Apennine Mountains and Mount Hadley. And this is a feature here called Hadley Rill. And we landed in what's called the Marshy Bog in this area right in the middle there. This is a picture of the command service module after the lunar module had separated. The view inside the very cramped inside the lunar module. There were no seats, I think the Neil Armstrong slept sitting on the engine bell, and I think Buzz Aldrin said he curled up in a ball on the floor. If you go to the Space Center, and you get to see what it's like inside. On this flight is quite unusual because Dave Scott decided to do an EVA that was nobody had did, and that's basically the depressurized the lunar module. So both him and Irwin had the spacesuits on, and Dave Scott opened the hatch at the top of the lunar module, and then he stuck his head out the roof basically, and then he popped back in again and got a Hasselblad camera, and he took this and several other pictures. And so so we had this, we called that the stand-up EVA, and that lasted for 33 minutes. Apollo 15 would have 3 main EVAs. EVA 1 was 6 hours, 32 minutes. I think we spent 2 days on the moon. EVA 2 was 7 hours and 12 minutes. And the final one, EVA 3, lasted for 4 hours and 49 minutes. And then, of course, Al Worden, I'll talk about that in a minute or two, he did his own special EVA. You can see in this panoramic picture here that the angle, the lunar module is a bit dodgy here. They were designed to a certain angle because if it went too far, you wouldn't be able to take off. And I think actually both Apollo 14 and Apollo 15 were a wee bit scary. I think it was Alan Shipper, they were lying at night trying to sleep, and hear all these creaking noises, and both him and Edgar were really concerned, was the thing going to tipple over, but it fortunately did not. So, yeah. So here's a close-up view. You can see of the moon car, and you can see Mount Hadley. And what's really impressive about this is basically it's an outside broadcast unit, an OB unit, you know. And you can see that this time they used an RCA camera that was a huge improvement over the Westinghouse camera. And it did also use the Baird sequential processing, the color filter reel. And the car's got a satellite TV dish for beaming the pictures back to Earth. And it's got a low gain antenna here. They could send pictures and information to the lunar module and also up to the command service module. So there's the astronauts working on the moon. I just notes in the time here, so I'll try and quick to go through these. The drilling the surface of the moon, that was always very difficult because it was really hard going. This is what it's like at Houston, Mission Control in Houston. You can see the big TV screen in the background. Another view of the car. Looking back to the lunar module. And the most interesting rock that we found on Apollo 15 was called the Genesis rock. And you can see that Jim Irwin found it here, and it's sitting on this bigger rock. And it's an anthrite rock, and we reckon it is 4 billion years old. And you've probably seen this as a famous picture of Jim Irwin saluting the flag, you know. And I think really of all the Apollo missions, this has probably got to be my favorite. It was the kind of the zenith of Apollo. Now then, Dave Scott did a rather nice thing here, and I'm now going to, there's just a few things, dodgy issues about Apollo 15 that NASA had no knowledge. After the tragedy of the loss of the cosmonauts, about a month before, Dave Scott came up with a lovely idea to have a memorial for fallen astronauts on the moon. And they produced this little card with all the names, and they got an artist to do the little fallen astronaut symbol. And this is all very well and great, and a lot of people liked this until about 3 or 4 months' time, these figures started appearing for sale. And that caused huge rumpus within NASA. And the other thing was that Dave Scott decided, without telling NASA, to take his own watch to the moon. This is a Belova watch, because the official one that they were meant to use is the Omega Speedmaster, and they were all issued with these moon watches. But on the first EVA, the capsule came off Scott's Speedmaster. So this was his excuse to try out the Belova watch. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Belova brought out a replica. I think it was about 500 quid, and Dave Scott sued them basically for it, you know. But that caused a rumpus. The most famous thing was the stamp cover, and Margaret Morris will know all about this episode. A German businessman proposed to David Scott that he'd take all these covers to the moon, frank them on the surface of the moon, and they get paid thousands of dollars for them. And the astronauts thought, well, it's a thing for our families, the kids' education, all the rest of it. Unfortunately, they did not tell NASA about this. And then what happened was that the guy in Germany decided only a couple of months after the flight that he was going to start selling these covers. And basically that ended these astronauts' career. And Colonel Worden was furious about this because both him and Jim Irwin weren't told about these covers. Yeah. And if you read his book, Falling to the Earth, you can see that. Apollo 15 was the first one we got to see the lunar module take off, but they lost it very quickly, the remote controlling the camera. But on 16 and 17, they got these problems sorted out. And if you look at the screen, unfortunately, I can find a better picture, you know. You can see all the bits coming off the lunar module, and when you see this, it's all multicolors, and that's an effect of the Baird TV process when it's a color wheel, because it doesn't like fast movement. You get color blurring, and we still use this if you have a DLP projector. So we have a lift off, and then they rendezvoused with Endeavour in orbit, and no problems. And then we flight back to Earth, and on the way back, what then happens is that Jim Irwin takes a heart attack on the spacecraft, because what had happened was that the astronauts had a thing that we call a drink mechanism in the spacesuits that failed, and they had Tang. You might have heard of Tang, you know, orange juice and all that, and they were dehydrated. And both these spacesuits didn't work, you know. High G forces of the launch, and Jim had a minor heart attack in the spacecraft, which was, and Al Worden, just after this, he made history with the deep spacewalk furthest away from the Earth to get the film cartridges out of the cameras. And this was meant to be filmed with a 16mm movie camera, but the film jammed. So unfortunately, he doesn't have a lot of pictures of this, and he got the Italian artist, I forget the name, that did the mission patch, to do a painting, and I have a copy of that painting that Colonel Worden signed for me on my wall. And then the only thing that went wrong with Apollo 15 was on the way back, one of the 3 parachutes failed. So that's why they have, if you see the SpaceX Dragon, you know, it's better to have 3 than 2, you know. And there they have returned to the Earth. And again, they took the coin. And this is the Genesis rock. It's the most important of all the Apollo 15 rocks. So I think, so that is basically that. And if I can now figure out how to stop sharing, let's see. So I'm now trying to find how I stop screen sharing.
I've got that for you, Robert.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So I hope you all found that interesting.
Oh, can you hear me, Robert?
Yeah, I can, just because I'm not going to speakers in because of to stop the buzzing noise, right?
I always, just on my own part, I always love getting a different view of things that you saw on the television. You got all the things that went on, all the small minutiae of each mission, things that went right, things that went wrong, things that people shouldn't have done, etc., etc. And it's lovely to find out these things even 50 years later. So from my point of view, thank you very much. An excellent put together of the Apollo. And you're the second Apollo presentation we've done this year. And from both of you, I forget who was the other chap. You know,
David Woods.
David, yeah. And David and yourself, you've given us a fair background to Apollo so many years later. Now, I'll say to everyone who's listening in, if you've got any questions, would you like to stick them into the chat box, or if it's a longer question for Robert, we will unmute you and you can ask it direct. If there's anyone there. I've got one for you while everyone's thinking about it, Robert. I was thinking back to the last shot into space, which was what was it called? The one with Elon Musk's
the Dragon, the Crew Dragon.
The Dragon. It was the spacesuits of the crew compared to the spacesuits of 50 years ago. I mean, it really looked as if they were very thin and very light and very modern. But
it's all Elon Musk being fancy and all the rest of it. The thing is that you have different types of spacesuits for different jobs. And these spacesuits, you couldn't actually go out into space with these spacesuits. They're only for wearing inside the spaceship, basically, you know. So they don't need to be heavy. Whereas the Apollo spacesuit had about 3 or 4 layers. It's a bit like the suits that the shuttle astronauts wore a pre-Challenger, you know. They didn't have, you know, they weren't really, you only needed a really big spacesuit if you were doing a spacewalk.
So it's a Sunday suit and a normal suit. I'm just looking down through the chat box. Lots of thanks from everyone. If you open the chat box yourself, you'll see that an excellent recount of 50 odd years ago. I was there.
Yeah,
I'm scared to admit it, but I was there. Yeah, excellent. So I'm just looking through. While people are thinking about it, Robert, being members night, we do tend to descend into a bit of chaos. And as part of my introduction to you, I forgot that we had, being members night, some members' images to show. So what I might do is, if Alistair is there, can you switch on the images while I check Robert for any more questions? Can you do that, Alistair?
I can, yes. I'll just thank Robert myself. That was wonderful. I as I've said, it actually feels like you were recounting something that's just happened, and I almost feel like looking up the TV guide to see how just how many days ago it was since the Apollo 15 launch.
I mean, it does. It's frightening to me now because I'm 60 now, and it is. It seems like yesterday, you know. It is a very long time ago. I was only 11 years old at the time, you know. But it is just absolutely mind-blowing to see people go to the moon. And one of the fascinating things is a lot of people just took that as normal. It was, you know. And 50 years later, we can't do things like that anymore. We're backward now, and we're struggling. And we are struggling, you know, both the United States and China are struggling to try to redo something that we did half a century ago.
Okay, this should keep Robert still pinned, and I will bring up the images now.
So hang on in there, Robert, and I'll just get any questions to you as the images are showing. Is anyone going to talk through them, Alistair, or are we just going to?
They are in a random order, and it's a selection of 12 images from 3 of our prominent members from our, now I need to get this right, our imaging group, not our previously called our astrophotography group, run by Colin Robb. And I'm just going to leave it, and it'll just cycle away. If Colin or others would like to speak, I can unmute them. There is a question though in the chat, Craig.
Yes. You want me to read it out? It's from Christina Green, Robert. She thanks you for your presentation. It says, how much danger were the astronauts in due to the radiation from the Van Allen belts or solar flares?
Yes, that's a very good question, right? When we went to the moon, you didn't look, the way that they launch the rocket, they don't go straight into the center of the Van Allen belt, they go out at an angle, basically. So there is radiation there, obviously. The big danger is solar flares from the sun. A storm on the sun, it was a big worry during Apollo. So if you want to go to the moon or Mars, it's best to go at solar minimum, you know. So NASA had to watch what the sun was doing on the run up to that launch. And the sun was okay, there's not a lot happening, you know. So they were okay. I think it was Apollo 16 that was a near disaster, because when John Young and Charlie Duke were out on the moon, and they had just left the moon and they were on the process on the way back home, there was a massive solar event, you know. And these astronauts could have died of radiation poisoning. There's, if you like a good story, the American author James Michener in the 1980s wrote a book called Space, It's like a faction book. It's fact and fiction, and he has an extra fictional Apollo mission where that happens, and it's a fascinating book to read. But that is a worry that we have for Mars, basically, as well. Yeah.
Excellent. They're coming in now, the questions. From Billy Russell, Robert, did the Apollo 15 crew report any vision problems due to cosmic rays, etc.?
Most of I don't want to say vision problems, but most of the early astronauts did see like flashes of light in their eyes. And I think actually we get that down here as well. They did report that, and that's cosmic radiation. What we're now seeing, it's a bit more worrying on the International Space Station when people are in, unlike the moon, you're in 0G, and you're up there for quite a long time, and the human eye seems to change, and it's a problem for the men. It doesn't seem to affect the ladies, but it affects men's eyes for some reason, which is a worrying thing,
Excellent. One from David Dagan coming in. There's also a major solar flare between Apollo 16 and 17 missions.
Yeah. I think that was the one I was talking about. That was the Apollo 16, the astronauts were very lucky,
Excellent. Just while the questions have slightly dried up, I'm absolutely on sensory overload here with these pictures coming through from members. These are stunning, absolutely stunning. I thought it wasn't possible for amateurs to make pictures like this. Well, there you go. I'm really impressed.
Well, you couldn't do that in 1971. You'd be out with your Zenit E, your Praktika, and you would have, Kodak Ektachrome film or something.
Gratis-spool film.
Yeah, gratis-spool, take them into Franks and get them developed.
How would these look on the, what was it, a 625? Your black and white television, new black and white TV?
Actually, if you look at low definition, on Freeview, for example, on an HD TV, the picture looks awful, But if you look at a low definition picture, like a VHS tape on a Troop TV, the picture is brilliant. So these pictures would actually, you've watched the sky at night for decades, and Patrick would show pictures like that, and they were quite spectacular on six. Quite spectacular.
I think they're stunning. There's another statement in from Stephen Hodson to everyone, just saying, "Hi Robert, which Apollo mission provided the rock displayed in the original Glasgow Museum? I saw it as a kid."
Yeah, as I did as well, yeah. So that was from that was in 1971, and we had a big conversation with the British Interplanetary Society about that last year, and I think that rock was from Apollo 11. I remember the security guard grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and pulling me out the hatch. And that moon rock, the moon rock was in a plastic ball, and there was an armed guard, the guy with a gun standing guarding it. I remember that,
Nothing's changed. They're still being grabbed by the neck. Yes, there's more just comments basically from David Dagan. I read James Michener's book, and I remember the TV episode with the solar flare. And coming in from Laura, praise indeed, these pictures are stunning. And I agree with Laura, they really are stunning. I can't say more than that. I must admit, I listened in to the imaging group a couple of weeks back, and they lost me after 5 minutes. They were talking about all sorts of filters and God knows what else. But really, when they showed some of their early pictures, they were just as stunning as the ones you can see just now.
I remember back in the 90s, we got for the Astronomical Society of Glasgow, the guy from Australia who was the big astrophotographer in the 90s. I can't remember I don't know if anybody remembers who I'm talking about. And his photographs are absolutely stunning at the time, and we also think these were amazing, but it is nothing compared to what you're seeing here at the moment.
I wouldn't thought these photographs were possible with amateur equipment, albeit somewhat expensive amateur equipment. But
yeah. So
I mean,
I'm seeing a question here, but I'm not seeing the full thing, Laura. It's shifting.
I can read it out loud.
Yeah.
It's from Alexander on YouTube. And thank you again for this amazing talk, Robert, by the way. Incredible. So the question is, do you think that the Apollo landings have played a role in shifting our focus toward future ventures, more purely concerned with remote exploration, given the technology we now have? Or is that initial achievement serving as encouragement for more manned landings?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, at the time, you know, that it's just absolutely a stunning achievement. We all thought that at the time that by now people would be on Mars, and unfortunately that never really happened. And it didn't happen for two reasons. The first reason was the cost. This stuff is very expensive. And the other one, of course, is a lack of the political will to do it, you know. But Apollo encouraged lots of people to go into science-type careers, you know. And then you got lots of scientists and astronomers and space scientists who got into the field because of Apollo, basically, you know. And obviously, Apollo encouraged the robotic, what we're going to see tonight now on Mars. The robotic space probes are fantastic. And I have always believed that we have to have a balanced space program. We need people going into space as well as human robots, you know. Because to me, it's a bit pointless if we're just going to send robotic probes to space and we're not going to go anywhere. These robotic probes on Mars, you know, like Spirit and Opportunity, Sojourner, Curiosity, and Perseverance, you know, they are leading the way for future astronauts. And we will go to Mars one day, you know.
Just thinking, Robert, if half the Apollo missions didn't have humans on board, they wouldn't have succeeded.
Well, the Americans did land the severe probes that landed on the moon in the run up to in the mid-60s because, you know, we weren't sure what would happen if you landed on the moon. Would you sink into it? Arthur Clarke had a famous sci-fi book, Fall of Moon Dust, you know, and so the Americans did to do what the Chinese are now doing, is to prove that you could get to the moon and you could get back, which China has succeeded in actually doing last year, at the end of last year. So the robotic probes to the moon led the way for astronauts to go.
Excellent. We still have more questions for you, Robert.
Right.
One from John Leck. What contractor designed the lunar rover, and were there any issues with deployment on the moon?
Yes, that's an excellent. I've got a book about it. There's a whole lot of companies came up with proposals. The lunar rover was designed by the Boeing company. It was Boeing that did the lunar rover. I think the Boeing got the contract. On Apollo 15, there was a problem with the steering on the front wheels didn't work properly, and they had to try to drive the thing with steering it from the back wheels. On Apollo 17, I think it was, there was a problem when you got a non-driver, like the fender, you know. I say, the only car that I know anything about is the lunar roving vehicle, you know. And I think all this going on about newfangled electric cars is a piece of nonsense, because we had electric cars 50 years ago, you know. And what they had to do was they had to get a map and they had to gaffer tape that to the fender, the broken fender, because otherwise Gene Cernan and his partner, they would get moon dust all over the place, you know. So apart from these two problems, the moon car seemed to work fine, you know. And you've probably all seen the John Young taking it for a spin.
Excellent. I have another question from Elaine McHugh. And she says, Robert, do you think the Apollo program could have achieved much more if the missions had continued beyond Apollo 17?
Yes, of course it did. We were only at the point in 1971, Apollo 15 was when they were starting to do serious science on the moon, you know. And they had, originally we were going to go up to Apollo 20. And I think the Apollo 19 was going to go to the Marius Hills, which is a place I would hope that we could go to. And Apollo 20 was going to, I think it was going to land in Copernicus. The problem with Apollo was that you were really only limited to the near side equatorial region of the moon. Whereas in Artemis, because we have the Moon Space Station, the Lunar Gateway, we will be able to land astronauts anywhere on the moon. And so they had hoped that we would have had a moon base in the 1970s. Yeah. And I think the plan was that after originally, I think there was going to be 2 flights in 1970, 2 flights in 71, and then they were going to take a break in 72, and they were going to do Skylab, and then they were going to go back to the moon in 74. We could have had an Apollo type moon base by 75, but that never happened, you know, because Richard Nixon wanted the second term in office and costs were astronomical, and he cut the budget basically, so NASA didn't have the money to do it. The Russians, the Soviets had a shot. They had another shot at the Lenin rocket. It blew up again, but the Soviets actually seriously considered a moon base in the mid-70s. But unfortunately, their rocket, you know, it was just totally useless, and they just abandoned that idea.
Excellent. Would you believe, Robert, we're actually back on schedule. You finished the lecture early, but the Q&A session brought us back onto schedule again. So that's always a healthy sign when the question and answer session is quite vibrant. So there's one more coming in. Hang on a minute. Right, this comes in from John Like again. Can you expand on the drilling issue on Apollo 15? I believe they got the drill stuck by leaning too hard on it, and it drilled into the soil.
Yeah, the problem is that some of these landing sites and this is the problem with the flags, you know, it's why the Apollo 11, they had huge problems trying to get the flag in, you know, and all the Apollo flags are still standing except 11. And Dave Scott and Jim Irwin told me that they were basically, their fingers were almost getting cut inside the gloves, you know, because with this drill, the moon rock was so hard, so it was very difficult, you know, to drill into the lunar soil. All the Apollo astronauts talked about that. It was very difficult.
So underneath the dust, the inches of dust, the rock was very hard.
I can say about the dust is a major problem. That dust gets everywhere, you know. It's dangerous. It's like glass almost. It's a health hazard. I'm told, the astronauts have told me that it smelled like rotten gunpowder, and that dust got everywhere, you know. And all the command module pilots had a joke that they go, you know, Al would go mental, you know, because to be Dave Scott and Jim Irwin, they're messing up my clean space capsule, you know. The vacuum cleaners are not trying to get rid of that. So there's been a lot of, over the years, there's a lot of work done on moon dust and designing spaces, because when we do go back to the moon, that is a problem.
Excellent. I take it, I think I know the answer. They didn't bring any creepy collies back from the moon with them.
Well, Apollo 12 did. And there's a big debate about that. There was alien life forms on the the moon, because what they did was they brought the TV camera back, and I've actually seen that in the Smithsonian from the Surveyor space probe that landed in 1966, and they discovered there was live bacteria on it. It survived. I don't think that they were alien bacteria. I think it was Earth bacteria that had been contaminated, from the Earth. But that bacteria had survived on the moon for about 2-3 years.
So you hope they're not still alive on the moon.
But with perseverance, that is a major issue about it's a big debate going on at the moment about, if you're landing space probes and other planets. I mean, that's like Cassini, that we had to send it into the Saturnian atmosphere because they didn't want to risk it crashing into one of the moons, because it could have affected their life, So I can see people in JPL now.
Excellent. I think we've exhausted you, Robert.
Yeah.
I'm very much obliged by all the questions and answers and the quality of your presentation. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and close the session and hand over to the Mars mission direct feed, because as you know and I know, they're hoping to do something on Mars at 5 to 9. So I'm not too sure what Alistair is going to be doing, but he's sent out the link, haven't you, Alistair?
Yes.
There we go.
So yeah, I'd encourage you to jump into the stream yourself, but I'm gonna share my computer audio. Can you hear that?
Yes, we can hear.
If it's too quiet or too loud, let me know. I can adjust it a little bit.
I'm good to go, folks. Okay, thanks again. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. That was wonderful.
A lovely lecture. Thanks, Robert. Take care.
Bye.
We should have telemetry until about 90.
Just while the lady is talking, I'm going to be rude and talk over to say that all members, our next meeting will be on the 18th of March, exactly 4 weeks from now. The subject will be cold gold. I'll say that again, cold gold, the secrets of ice in the solar system, by Professor Axel Hagerman, Department of Biological and Environment Services, University of Stirling. So I think we'll keep the feed going for a while, and we'll probably end in half an hour or 40 minutes or so, or 30 minutes. Would you agree with that, Alistair?
Yes.
Are you recording this at the moment? Is it on our feed?
I am, but I think now that we've concluded the meeting, I'll stop the recording.
Okay.